Allegiance, and our invocation is by Councilmember Joy. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heroes are people who say, "This is my community, and it's my responsibility to make it better." That is a quote from the former Oregon Governor, Tom McCall, who served from 1967 to 1975. As we have decisions to make, let us respectfully cast a thought to those who have stewarded our land and community. Indigenous peoples of the Absaloka, Northern Cheyenne, Assiniboine, and Sioux sustain traditional lands, culture, economy, medicine, and community. Their contributions to our community continue to this day. Our city is named after Frederick Billings, and he too had a vision. During his tenure at the railroad, Billings advocated for the promotion of Western scenery as a tourist destinations and the protection and reclamation of railroad lands through tree planting and experimental farming. By acquainting Americans with their country's natural wonders, he believed we might inspire protection of these sites. We have many expectations and aspirations to live up to. I have no doubt we will exceed those expectations. Keep in your thoughts those who put their lives on the line for our safety in our city and worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. Denise, please call the roll.
Councilmember Shaw? Here. Gulick?
Here.
Neese?
Here. Here. Thank you. Online.
Okay. Owen?
Excused.
Joy?
Present.
Kennedy?
Here.
Aspen Leader?
Here.
Tidswell?
Here.
Boyette?
Here.
Rupsis?
Here.
Mayor Cole?
Here. Council, our first order of business are minutes from March 11, 2024 that were distributed earlier. Are there any changes, discussion, or motion relating to our March 11 minutes? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve the March 11, 2024 minutes as read.
Second by Councilmember Tidswell. Any discussion? Seeing none, if in favor of the motion, which is for approval, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Any council courtesies this evening? And Councilmember Neese, I'll just ask you to go ahead and at any time feel free to raise your little yellow hand. And if other council members see the yellow hand up, please call my attention to it. Councilmember Neese?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I couldn't get off mute to say aye.
Very good. Thank you. Any council courtesies? Seeing none, we do have two proclamations tonight. First, in recognition of Child Abuse Prevention Month. And the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas children are invaluable and key to our city's future success, prosperity, and quality of life, and they are our most vulnerable members of our society. And whereas child abuse and neglect can be prevented by supporting and strengthening the families, thus preventing the far-reaching effects of maltreatment, providing the opportunity for children to develop healthy, trusting family bonds, and consequently building the foundations of communities. And whereas we are part of a helping community, providing services to families in need, we must also partner with others to ensure that all children's voices are heard. And whereas providing a safe and nurturing environment for children void of violence, abuse, and neglect ensures that they will develop into their full potential and may become leaders of local, national, or international communities of future generations. And whereas, or now, therefore, be it resolved that I, William Cole, Mayor of Billings, Montana, do hereby proclaim April 2024 as Child Abuse Prevention Month, where all citizens are encouraged to help prevent the abuse and neglect of any child. In just a minute, I'm going to read the other proclamation because they're generally connected, but I'm going to hand the microphone. Well, I'm not going to physically hand the microphone. I'm going to give an opportunity to Councilmember Bill Kennedy, who's been involved in this space for many years, an opportunity to tell us more. The second proclamation is in recognition of Week of the Young Child. Whereas for the first years of a child's life are critical for brain development and future learning, and approximately 12% of the 12,000 children in Yellowstone County under age 6 live in low-income families. And whereas parents of almost 3/4 of all children in Yellowstone County work outside the home, and only 46% of children of working parents can be served by a regulated child care facility, causing many families across the state to either cut back work hours or have quit working altogether. And whereas quality early childhood programs benefit children, families, and our local economy by ameliorating poverty, remediating delays, preventing child neglect, and helping children prepare for school so that they're more likely to succeed in life. And whereas many child care providers continue to support children and families during the pandemic continued at great personal and professional cost to themselves, and payment rates for services to low-income children do not cover the costs of quality care. And whereas our community and its children benefit from quality early childhood education that's developmentally appropriate, accessible, affordable, and reflects a rich diversity of linguistic, racial, and cultural identities. And whereas we support the teachers and providers of early childhood education in our community who deserve a family-sustaining wage that is commensurate with the required education and skills that they bring to the complex and valuable work that they do. And whereas the Week of the Young Child is an annual week-long national celebration created by National Association for the Education of Young Children, now, therefore, I, William Cole, Mayor of Billings, Montana, during the 53rd anniversary of the Week of the Young Child, do hereby proclaim April 6 through 12, 2024, as Week of the Young Child in Billings, and recognize the essential work of early childhood educators in our community, and urge all citizens to support efforts that increase children and families' access to high-quality early childhood education. I'm going to hand it to Councilmember Kennedy to talk about Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm with the Family Tree Nurturing Center, and we're a resource in respite care over in the Old Taft School. And we have, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. We have a schedule of events. On Mondays, we're asking people to wear blue on Mondays in recognition for the, to raise awareness of child abuse prevention. On April 5th at 11 o'clock, we'll be putting the pinwheels up on the courthouse lawn and at Metro Park. And at that time, at noon, the mayor and one of the commissioners will be proclaiming for the city and the county the proclamation that the mayor just read. And then we will, Blue Sunday is April 28th, and Blue Sunday is faith-based initiative to lead the community in an awareness of children who are abused and neglected. And then on April 11th, Pinwheels for Prevention is an awards assembly at the Family Tree Nurturing Center, 2520 Fifth Avenue South. And we recognize people in the community that in a reception and honored wonderful people who have supported us in the prevention of child abuse and neglect. We have a full month going on, and statewide, we're working with the governor's office and we're working with the Children's Trust Fund as we raise an awareness that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy, and thank you for your work in this space and your great staff and all your supporters. Was there anybody else who came to address specifically either of the two proclamations this evening? Please come forward then. Thank you. Just want to make sure the microphone is on.
Thank you.
Oh, that's better.
Okay, so thank you again for being the third year in a row for proclaiming Week of the Young Child as a national celebration that's sponsored by the National Association of Education for Young Children. So this event is a focus for public attention on the needs of young children, their families, and to recognize the early childhood programs and services that meet those needs. This year, we're celebrating our second in-person family fun fair in honor of Week of the Young Child. We have invited different organizations that support children in the community to provide resources and then also an activity for children. And this will be held at the Eagle Seeker Community Center on April 13th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we encourage you and your families to come and check it out. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. If that's the, concludes our two proclamations, we'll move on. Council reports. Anything that any of the council members like to report from organizations that you serve on behalf of the city? Seeing none. City administrator reports. Chris.
Mayor and council, just two very brief items, or one regular, primarily, which is regular agenda item 4, so 4C, and you saw an email to this effect, but there's several steps in item 4. C is the annexation agreement. The property just has been sold in the last couple of weeks. There's confirmation from the new buyer that they would like to move forward with the zone change and the annexation, but we'd like to bring that annexation agreement back to you in 2 weeks to get the proper name on that. So bottom line is a motion to remove item 4C, but continue to proceed with the other 3 items, subcomponents of it, and we'll bring that annexation agreement back to you most likely on April 22nd. And then the second item is that there is no ex parte communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You see any reason not to just address the schedule issue of 4C right now? No reason to wait, right,
Sure.
until we get to item 4. So, Council, how do you want to proceed? Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we remove item 4C, the annexation agreement for that particular property, from the agenda, place it on agenda in a future meeting.
Councilmember Shaw indicates a second. Is there any discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion again is just to delay item 4C to the next business meeting. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. That motion passes unanimously. We'll move on then to public comment on things that are not going to have a public hearing later. Tonight, that's everything under item 1, our consent agenda, and that's all, includes all the subparts. And a copy of the agenda, if you don't have one, is on that cart back there. Also, the item, I guess, 5C, which is the annexation contract on item 5. But realistically, if you want to comment on that during the public hearing, on the zone change or the annexation, we're not going to worry about you doing it then. So really, it's just the consent agenda. Would anybody like to address anything on the consent agenda? If so, please come to the podium. We always ask that you take 3 minutes or less and tell us your name and address. Any comment on item 1? No one's coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period on at this time and move on to our consent agenda. Before I ask for separations for separate votes, Council, I just want to call attention to the many donations that were given to the city. It's a little unusual on our agenda tonight because we have 6 of them, and they add up to be several $100,000 in value. And it's just important, I think, for our taxpayers to know that there are many generous individuals and organizations out there that contribute to the running of the city. So, for example, Phillips, item 1H, Phillips 66, grant to the fire department for rescue apparatus to the tune of about $20,000 of value. Item J from the Library Foundation for 2 book lockers. These are the remote book lockers that the library puts books in throughout our community, and then a person can go and get their books or tapes or whatever they're borrowing at 3 o'clock in the morning if they want to. And that's a $92,000 and some grant. Also, Shields giving the police department for their canine operations $10,000, and United States Tennis Association, item 1M, $750 for the kids' tennis is elementary program. Last but not least, and I just want to call some kind of special attention to item 1K, which is a donation from high school student Addie Allen for the Parks and Recreation Scholarship Fund. This was an award that Addie secured, and it's really, I just want to read the staff report that describes what this is. Addie Allen currently coaches the third through fifth grade volleyball for the Recreation Division of City Parks and Rec, and has been a coach for the last 3 years. Addie was named the Gatorade Player of the Year for 2023-24 season, which is a big deal in the sport of volleyball for the whole state. Addie has chosen to donate her $1,000 award to the Recreation Division Scholarship Fund. Addie said that she chose the Recreation Division because she played her very first volleyball in a City of Billings Recreation Youth Volleyball Program. And kudos to Addie, kudos to our Parks Department, to the city, and that's how we're influencing kids for the rest of their lives. So that's my little preview to the consent agenda. Council, do we have other separations? Councilmember Aspinwall-Lighter.
I'd like to separate agenda item or consent agenda item N and Q1 and Q2 for purposes of recusal.
Thank you very much. Other separations. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I couldn't hear what was separated, but I would like to separate 1 and if it has not been separated yet.
And it was only separated, well, we will have a separate vote for recusal purposes, but it's going to be a separate vote anyway. So, yes, it is.
Yeah, I actually was separating that, but I would prefer to move it down to down into the agenda before 6, if that's acceptable, because it really relates to item 6, and rather than tying up the consent agenda period. I'd like to move it down there to just before item 6.
Why don't we address that when we get to that item, and then you can potentially make a motion to amend our agenda to that effect and describe the reason for it then. Okay, any other separations? Okay, Council, motion for the non-separated items. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve consent agenda items, all of them except for 1N and Q1 and Q2 as defined.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Gulick. Any discussion? Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, I have a couple questions for you, and they're not hard-hitting questions, but I want to give you a little opportunity to hopefully help educate me a bit. 1E is our amendment for the water treatment plant contract. And this is a contract that we've got a construction manager at risk going for, and we keep seeing these amendments with, multi-million dollars kind of things. And what I'm wondering is, are we slowly building up to that total maximum, or are these actually changes in scope that are affecting what that maximum will be?
So we have 2 main contracts. One's for the engineering firm and one's for the contractor. For the contractor, we have the guaranteed maximum price, and we will not be changing that unless, we have a need of scope change for some reason. The engineer, we just did by pieces because we didn't know what we were doing for the whole project. So that has been, we did the feasibility, then we did the design, now we're doing construction.
Okay.
So they're 2 different methods.
All right, so this is just the engineering piece of it. Thank you.
For the construction. So hopefully this is it for the construction.
This should be the last piece of the engineering.
Yes.
And so those 2 pieces together, were those always the total of 140 or 50, whatever our total was?
These are still within the budget that we gave you.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. And Mayor, one other question on a different one. One of the bills I noticed has the bill for our Earth First recycling program, our new cardboard recycling program. And I noticed it's about $3,000 to $4,000, and I think we allowed $300,000 to $400,000 for the year, thinking that might be like $30,000 a month. Are we, that's a little low? Are we expecting higher numbers? Are we building? What do you think? How does it look there?
It is a little low, lower than we anticipated. It was hard to know how much we would get from our community. You know, we put the offer out there. We based it on what our total waste stream had for cardboard, made some assumptions, and we thought it would be a little bit higher. We're currently collecting between about 15 and 16,000 pounds a week, so about 8 tons. It's not as much as we'd like to see. We hope to keep encouraging that. And I think through this summer, when people use their bins for maybe more yard waste or you know, higher things in the summer, we'll see more cardboard. But we'll, not as much as we thought.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the non-separated items? All right, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval of the items that were not separated. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. That motion passes unanimously. Our first separated item is item 1N. This is the preliminary minor plat for Skyview Ridge, second filing. So that's the property on the south side of Wicks Lane near High Sierra. We know that Council Member Aspenleiter is going to recuse himself, but Council Member Neese, did you want to address that further?
Yes, Mayor, because this relates to item number 6 very closely, I'd like to keep the conversation together with item number 6, and I'd like to make a motion to move this item to be addressed just prior to item number 6.
Okay. So motion is to amend our agenda.
Second.
Councilmember Kennedy makes the second. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Neese, did you want to speak to your earlier? I guess I'll just ask staff whether they see any downside to doing that. But if you wanted to comment further, have you said everything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think there's some ideologies and things that we need to discuss regarding this item that will be closely related to item 6. And I think it'll be best if these comments are tied close together. And so when we're talking about this land use issue, it's one item we're looking at overall, but several different processes we have to go through.
Okay, so this is a two-lot, or my recollection, it's a two-lot minor subdivision. Nicole, did you want to comment? Do you see any downside to our doing this? Are you our planning representative this evening, or Chris? Or Hunter's
I'm
here?
working on the zone change for this project, which is item number 6, and I have followed the email discussion today about this minor plat as it relates to that zone change. So I hope to answer your questions at that time.
Okay, so I'm not here. Chris?
So specific, Mayor, to the question of whether you approve it at consent or you review it for approval now, or you wait until just before item 6, that's completely up to you. It doesn't affect.
Okay, just want to clarify that. All right, so any further discussion necessary on this motion before we proceed to a vote? No one's raising their hand, so if in favor of the motion, which would adjourn item 1N to be immediately before item 6, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes. We'll address that item when we get to it. Item Q1 and or 2, Councilmember Boyette.
I move that we approve the bills of the week of February 20th, 2024. And should we have 2 votes or 1 vote, do you think? Together?
Yeah, unless Gina sees a problem with doing that.
Mayor, Council, I didn't hear, was just one of them? Were they both removed or separated?
Yes, they both were by Councilmember Aspenleiter for purposes of recusal.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, if he's recusing himself, I think you could make one motion for both.
So then for the bills of the week of February 20th, 2024 and February 26th, 2024.
Very good. Councilmember Gulick makes the second. Any discussion? Okay, motion is for approval. Those two items, if in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously, both items. That concludes item 1. Brings us to our regular agenda, item 2. Denise, would you read item 2?
Public hearing allowing the city to submit a revised infrastructure grant application to the Montana Department of Commerce. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So back in January, there's no presentation, but walk through a little bit of what you're being asked for tonight. Back in January, you were presented with 3 projects to submit for House Bill 355, the State Local Infrastructure Partnership Act. 2 of those projects have already been approved. One of them, it was identified, could not be under contract by the required deadline, which is the end of this calendar year. So we went back and they identified another project, which is the, the storm project. I just had it here on Grand and 48th Street West. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the sewer one. I apologize, I didn't underline it here. But they identified a storm project that can be under contract by the end of this year. One of the requirements in order to submit for this application was that you hold a public hearing for these projects. So that's actually all you're being asked to do tonight is hold a public hearing. There's actually no council action on this item. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Again, council, no action required, but other than holding the public hearing. So if there's nothing or no questions for Andy, we'll proceed immediately to the public hearing. Okay, don't see anything. So this is a public hearing on item number 2, allowing the city to submit revised infrastructure grant application to the Montana Department of Commerce. If anybody would like to be heard on that, please come forward. Anybody, any comment on item 2? Any comment on item 2? No one's coming forward, so the public hearing is going to be short. And we'll conclude the public hearing and close the public comment period. We'll move on if there's nothing else. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Having conducted a public hearing, considered, written, and spoken.
You know, so Councilmember Joy, I'm just going to ask, because you're absolutely right, that is on our agenda as a recommended motion. So Andy, the recommended motion was to approve the submission of the grant application.
I think if you would like to take a formal vote on that, that's fine, but I believe the requirement from the state was that we hold a public hearing, so.
Okay, so it'd be our own internal rules about whether we have to have a approval, I guess. Well, I don't see any harm in that.
Go for it.
So, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered, written, and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the submission of a revised infrastructure grant application to the Montana Department of Commerce as recommended by staff.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette makes the second. Is there any discussion before we proceed to a vote? Seeing none. Okay, so you heard the motion. If in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes. That concludes item 2 and brings us to item 3. Denise, would you read item number 3?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance for zone change 1043, generally located at 4190 South Frontage Road. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 review criteria.
Okay, I'm not sure if Mr. Island has to share the screen. Okay, while the technology is being prepared, this is a zone change at 4190 South Frontage Road. This is a small piece of property that is within the city limits and is directly west of Intermountain Distributing. It is currently zoned residential manufactured home, and that was its original zoning in the county before it was annexed to the city and provided with a water service. The property owner removed 2 manufactured homes from the property because they were dilapidated, and then discovered that the Department of Environmental Quality would not allow new residential dwellings to be put on there because it is within proximity of city sewer services. The city sewer services that are in South Frontage Road, however, are transmission mains that are very deep, and it would be very expensive to bring a connection main to this property from that distance where it currently ends to the east. Okay, so let's see. This is on. So the proposed zoning is for heavy commercial, which is adjacent to the property to the east. And maybe, there we go. The heavy commercial zoning allows warehousing, wholesale, contractor warehouse uses. It also allows uses that don't require or necessarily wouldn't require a connection to a sewer. For those uses, they've gotten some preliminary information from DEQ and our local health department that could be allowed. This property has its own drive approach. It's not connected to an existing neighborhood that is to the west, which is a manufactured home subdivision called AgriCenter. And any new development on the property would require conformance with our site development requirements. For example, this type of use and zoning adjacent to a residential zone would require a full buffer yard to be installed that would give the buffering to that manufactured home subdivision that does not have it now. The Zoning Commission conducted their public hearing on March 5th and is recommending approval to you. They find that this does meet the growth policy goals and objectives, our infill policy, and the South Billings Urban Renewal Master Plan, I believe of 2012. The adjacent uses and zoning are compatible with the proposed zoning. It is located on a high-speed arterial corridor, which is really not conducive to residential dwellings. And as I said, they'll be required to install that buffer yard when new development happens on the property. So you can see the location of the subject property here is only 1.35 acres. It's very narrow and deep from South Frontage Road. It actually was connected to the school parcel on the north side of the interstate before the interstate went through and cut it in half, basically. We have CX zoning to the east, residential manufactured home zoning to the west. So we have a little bit of city that is overlapping with the county there. Here's a subject property. So you can see the Old Dominion Freight, which is to the south and east, the Intermountain Distributing, which is directly east, and there are several other large warehouse and transportation-oriented businesses to the east. This parcel to the west is in the county. It's a residential manufactured home zone and has been there for many decades. Here's a subject property from South Frontage Road looking towards the river, looking towards those existing warehouse businesses to the east, and the manufactured home AgriCenter subdivision to the west. As you can see, there is no buffer yard now between these two properties, and all of these properties can easily see the manufacturing and the warehousing to the east of them. Here are your criteria for zone changes, and the Zoning Commission's findings are in your staff report. Again, here is the zoning map and the aerial, and I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Are there questions? Councilmember Gulick.
Nicole, I totally understand why the change to heavy commercial in terms of connecting to the sewer. In our retreat, we talked about the importance of addressing our entryway corridors and whatnot. Can you remind me what's in our ordinance for heavy commercial or other ones, just along, in terms of just, that would prevent visual blight? Is there anything in the zoning ordinance that then code enforcement takes care of? Just if you could remind me and council about that.
Well, any new development requires conformance with our current standards for landscaping, for signage, for minimum or maximum setbacks. For example, our CX zone doesn't allow parking along the front of the building. That's not an allowance. It either has to be in a side yard or a rear yard. It doesn't mean that the building has to be at the street, but it means that the parking has to be to the side. So the street frontage landscaping applies. There may be a waiver that the owner would sign to complete the multi-use path in front of this property because we don't have it that far to the west yet. But it is coming across the frontage of those heavy commercial properties that are developing right now. So in addition, we have storage requirements for heavy commercial properties. So if they're going to store equipment and supplies, it has to be in a visual barrier area. So all of those things are in our code now, and they are enforced.
Okay, other questions for Nicole? This is a public hearing. We'll begin the public hearing if there aren't any other questions. Don't see any. So thank you, Nicole. This is a public hearing on item number 3, zone change 1043. If you'd like to comment on that item, please come to the podium. And again, we ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes.
I must have a question.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Thank you. Councilmember Nish, did you have a question or comment?
No, I don't, but just to let you know, I will be down for a little bit. My computer suddenly decides to do a reboot, so I will be out and not be able to hear anything for just a moment.
Okay.
Oh, you're just doing too? Okay. All right.
We're going to just take a little pause here so that Councilmember Nice doesn't miss anything critical. The joys of technology. In theory, Councilmember Nice, can you still hear us? No, because he's shutting down his computer completely, so.
So is our system.
We're up to 2%. We might be back by 2026.
Mine did it about half an hour ago. It took about 5 minutes.
Really? Okay. I'm just going to ask members of the public, is there anybody who is planning to make comment on item number 3? This is zone change 1043. Go ahead and just raise your hand. That gives us a little better idea of what we're dealing with here. I'm not seeing. Oh, there is somebody. Okay. Okay. Why don't we, if you don't mind coming forward, we'll put that on the record. And then anything that is substantive, once we have Councilmember Nice on board, we'll go back and try to do a little summary so that he won't miss out on anything. But were there any, so we got the developer's agent. Are there any questions for the developer's agent?
I'll come back in a few minutes.
Yeah, I guess not. Sorry for the delay. We would just move on, except for that would mean that we would be eliminating one of our council members. Sure.
I think we can keep going. I think so.
If you can get him, and then he can at least hear and participate in the vote.
Mayor and council, my suggestion,
It's close enough. I mean, because you can't see him. Okay, what are we still in the 30s or something like that, percentage-wise? We're going backwards? Did you say it's shut down again, or?
Okay. Councilman Lee said there's no objection to us proceeding.
Okay, and tell them there was no the public comment, so, okay, very good. All right, given our technical difficulties, we will proceed. I will formally open the public hearing. Is there anybody who would like to comment on item number 3? This is a public hearing. Item number 3, again, the agent from the developer is here to answer any questions, but is not making any public comment. So we'll close the public comment, period. Council, is there a motion? Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1043 and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. Is there a second, Councilmember Aspenleiter?
I'm going to earn my paycheck tonight.
There you go. That's any discussion? Any discussion? Any council member? Seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Motion is for approval of item 3. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. We're getting close, but we'll proceed on with the reading of item 4. Denise, would you read item number 4?
George Jervich property. It's south of Grand Avenue, east of 80th Street West. It's a joint public hearing for annexation 2401 and zone change 1044. 4A is resolution approving annexation 2401, a parcel generally located south of Grand Avenue and east of 80th Street West. Staff recommends conditional approval.
Hunter is our presenter this evening on this item. It'll probably take us a minute to get up, but Hunter, why don't you go ahead and proceed. If it's anything important, we can go back and try to catch up Councilmember Neese when we have him again.
Sure. All right, so this is the first annexation of 2024 to come across our desks. This is regarding a 1 acre parcel. Let's see here. So that is south of Grand Avenue and east of 80th Street West. Feel lost without this presentation. So currently this property is zoned rural residential 1. That is not a zoning district that is recognized by the city zoning code. So this is also undergoing a concurrent zone change 1044, which we're going to hear about later on tonight. So tonight we're going to be hearing about the annexation, the zone change, and the ward boundary ordinance. We will not be hearing anything about the development agreement tonight for this item, as we discussed earlier. So, as stated in our staff report, this annexation does meet the 7 criteria that the city uses as part of its annexation policy. So it is within the limits of annexation map. As would be discussed in the annexation agreement, the city would be able to provide adequate city services. Any existing proposed public improvements to the area will need to meet city standards. All the property owners will need to sign a waiver of right to protest for the creation of special improvement districts. All residential property owners within the area must either create or join an existing park maintenance district. This area isn't adding any parkland, so that is not going to apply here. The residential densities plan for development within this area shall meet an overall average minimum density of primary dwelling units per acre as per the current growth policy. The upcoming zone change, which we'll talk about at length later, is going to bring this zoning into NX2, neighborhood mixed 2, which is a minimum of 2 dwelling units all the way up to 8 dwelling units per building within the lot. And then finally, the proposed land use within the area shall conform to the goals of the growth policy, which staff has identified as conforming to the home base and the strong neighborhoods growth policies as part of this annexation. Other city staff has responded favorably to this annexation, and staff is recommending approval on the annexation itself. And
Hunter, I'm just going to ask you, or ask Kevin for a minute, on Councilmember Neese, are we waiting for him to call in on the Zoom?
okay. I think this one will be good for now, just kind of showing the parcel's current location. It's a bit of an enclave parcel. It's completely surrounded by annexed land already. So this is more just finishing up what was an ongoing process around there.
Okay. Anything else on your presentation on the annexation?
On the annexation itself, no. Cole, if you want to take over for the zone change portion of it.
Did the clerk already read the public hearing for the zone change?
We have not had the public hearing on either, and it'll be joint for both. So, Kevin, again, you've got to reach out to Councilmember Neese to set up the Zoom meeting. I'm trying to start it again. Okay. Well, yeah, let's give you an opportunity to do that.
Mayor, did you want me to read item 4B?
Hold on just a second. We'll,
Sure.
we've got a good. We're waiting for Councilmember Neese to join.
I don't think so. Yeah.
No, we'll wait.
Okay, I'm back.
Great. Welcome back, Councilmember Neese. In your absence, we had a presentation by Hunter Kelly on item 4A, the annexation of this 1 acre lot south of Grand at 80th. We're now going to begin the presentation on the zone change by Nicole. When we're done with that, if you've got some questions on the annexation, we can go back to Hunter if you would like. Frankly, it was pretty straightforward, so and fairly quick. So we'll turn it over to Nicole for the zone change, and when Nicole's done, we'll have a joint public hearing on both the annexation and the zone change. Nicole.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Annexations to the city are conducted with a joint hearing for zoning and for the annexation and ward boundary ordinances. So it's all lettered and numbered appropriately. This is the parcel. It's a wholly surrounded parcel by the city. I think it was last year now, Buffalo Crossing subdivision was annexed. A P&D was approved, but the owner of this parcel did not want to sell that piece to the owner developer of Buffalo Crossing. The owner found someone he would be willing to sell to, Taj McAdam, and he has recently closed on this property, hence the delay of the annexation agreement, so we can get the names correct in that contract. The surrounding zoning of the property it's hard to distinguish on this big screen, but there is NX2 zoning to the north of this parcel. There's also N3 zoning to the west and to the south. This parcel, Mr. McAdam has been working with the developer of Buffalo Crossing to ensure that there is internal access for this parcel and not the easement that currently exists that goes through the Buffalo Crossing property to provide a second access out to Grand. That will be extinguished as part of this process. So they won't have a second access to Grand. They'll only access internally from Buffalo Crossing. Oops, I went backwards, sorry. And now here. So this is a subject property from the northeast corner of Buffalo Crossing. We physically could not get on the property to go to this parcel because that easement has never been built. And there's lots of construction equipment out there, so we posted it at Grand Avenue, but it's straight south of these signs. This is if you're looking west across the property, and then west on Grand Avenue towards 62nd. This parcel is very far east of 80th Street West. It's across the street from Foxtail Village at 5900 block of Grand. This is if you're looking east, you see Trails West on the right-hand side of the screen and Foxtail Village on the left-hand side of the screen on Grand Avenue. And this is looking directly north across Grand. And of course, Hunter already reviewed this slide with you, but this is how this parcel meets the annexation policy criteria and supports strong neighborhoods and home base. The Zoning Commission is recommending approval to you. The proposed zoning does allow that 2 to 8 unit configuration for structures. Building and siting standards will be required and home occupations are allowed. They believe the Zoning Commission's recommendation is based on the facts that they find that it meets the intent of the growth policy, the infill policy, and the West Billings neighborhood plan, that the adjacent uses and zoning are compatible, and that it will be located within a new subdivision adjacent to NX2 zoning and development. Again, here is the zoning map showing the surrounding zoning and the area and your zone change criteria. And we recommend that you hold this joint public hearing on the annexation and zone change, act on them separately, but conduct the hearing as a joint hearing. That's it.
Very good. Thank you, Nicole. Questions for Nicole or Hunter on either the annexation or the zone change presentation? Any questions for staff? Okay, we don't see any, so we will go ahead and open it up for a public hearing. I'm sorry, Councilmember Bernice, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Nicole, real quick, as I look through this, and I'm sorry if I missed it during the first presentation when I was getting logged in, but I do recall this property when we approved this and had that little island out there that was kind of just sitting there in county. And they left a access road to that property, and I'm sorry if I missed what you said on this. It sounded to me like that access road's going away and they're just gonna have internal access. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct. And it wasn't an actual road yet. It was an easement for a road that was put in there on a plat.
Okay, so does that, since that easement's gonna be gone, does that change anything that's being done on what was approved or what they're developing since
No.
that road no longer is needed?
No, it does not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. So we'll open up for public hearing. This is, again, the joint public hearing on both the annexation proposal and the zone change. 4A and 4B, please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Greg Reed with WWC Engineering. I'm not the agent on this. Taj is the agent, but I've been assisting him with it. So Nicole and Hunter covered it really well. Just a couple of highlights on this. It's an island within the city limits that's looking to be annexed. So this is a beneficial process that's happening. The NX2 zoning that we're going for is a continuation from the project to the north. And then I guess to further expand on the note about the easement, the existing easement was related to a county development with the intent of potentially a single house. It was a 25-foot wide easement. So it wouldn't have allowed city development. It wasn't the required width to get a roadway in there. So this developer is working with the other developer of Buffalo Crossing to get a full 34-foot wide easement through there to provide access to their units to the south. And with that, I can answer any questions anybody might have.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Greg? Don't see any. And if Councilmember Nice, you don't have any questions, so we'll move on. Thank you very much. Any other public comment on this item, or these two items? Any other public comment? No one's coming forward. No one's coming forward, so we'll close the public hearing on item number 4. And we need to address these two separately. First, item 4A, the annexation. Councilmember Aspenleiter?
Mr. Mayor, I guess this is maybe a question for you. You put forward a proposed annexation agreement amendment for parks and open space to be considered on a later agenda item that I'm recusing myself from. However, I'm not recusing myself from this, and it appears that if we're going to start putting additional language in agreements, that we should be doing this universally across the board. And this is a prime example of a property that's going to be developed with multifamily that's going to skirt out, if that's what you're trying to prevent, the 11% or the net area for parkland, because it wasn't included in the larger development parcel. So my concern here comes to the annexation agreement, which we're going to deal with later. If we're going to start putting additional language in on one-off applications, we need to be consistent about that as council, so that every development understands exactly what they're doing and exactly what the rules of the road are. To me, I think it's a terrible idea to start with. I think it's well-intentioned, but completely the wrong avenue to try to attack this. But if we're going to do this, we need to do it universally across the board for every developer and not cherry pick the ones that come across, maybe forgetting others that it seems like don't apply. Again, I think this is a terrible idea, but if we're going to do it, we need to do it universally as council and treat every developer the same.
Okay, Councilmember Aspenleiter, I'll just, nobody made the obvious observation that technically that was out of order just because that issue is not before us. The annexation agreement has been delayed to 4C. The other question is how would you do multifamily on a 1-acre lot? But, okay, all right. So we've got that out there. Is there further discussion before motion on item 4A? Okay, Councilmember Boyette.
Okay, so having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve the resolution conditionally approving annexation 24-01 as recommended by staff.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Joy. Any discussion? Before we proceed to vote. Okay, so motion is for approval of item 4A. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And so the motion, if opposed, please say nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes item 4A. Item 4B is the zone change. Is there any questions for staff, comments, or motion? Councilmember Joy?
Thank you. Mayor and Council, having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1044 and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Nice. Further discussion? Any further discussion? Motion for approval of item 4B. If Councilmember Nice?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were taking for a vote.
Yeah, no, we will now move to a vote. If in favor of the motion for approval 4B, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes also unanimously. Item 4C has been delayed, but brings us to item 4D. Denise, would you read item 4D?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance expanding the boundaries of Ward 4 to include recently annexed property in annexation 2401, a parcel generally located south of Grand Avenue and east of 80th Street West. Staff recommends approval.
Okay, typically, we do not have a staff presentation on this one. We do not. So this is, for the members of the public, this is just the item that would add this property, once it is annexed, to Ward 4. We do have to have a public hearing on that. So if anybody would like to comment on item 4D, this is your opportunity. Is there any public comment on item 4D? This is a public hearing. No one is coming forward. No one's coming forward. So we'll close the public hearing on item 4D, move to a vote. Is there a motion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Usually the ward asks to make the motion, but that's okay. I'll read it. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance expanding the boundaries of Ward 4 as recommended by staff.
Second. Second by Councilmember Tidswell. Proceed to the vote. If in favor of the motion, item 4D, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes 4, and we'll move on then to item 5. Again, we've got a joint hearing for annexation and zone change. So, Denise, would you read 5A and 5B?
Yes, this is for Brown Builders LLC property located at 2524 Central Avenue. It will be a joint public hearing for annexation 2402 and zone change 1045. Resolution approving annexation 2402, a parcel generally located south of Central Avenue and east of South 48th Street West. Staff recommends conditional approval. Also, there will be a first reading ordinance for zone change 1045, generally located at 4524 Central Avenue. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 review criteria.
Thank you very much. Back to Hunter for a presentation on item 5A, annexation 2402.
All right, so this is our second annexation for 2024 tonight. The owner we have is Todd Brown, being represented by Performance Engineering. We're going to be hearing over the annexation resolution tonight, as well as the ward boundary ordinance and zone change. And I believe there is also an ongoing development with the development agreement, which we can get to at that later time. So here is the property in question. It is located south of Central Avenue and east of South 48th Street West. This parcel is generally described as Tract 2 of Certificate of Survey 3844, containing about 50 gross acres, more or less. Currently, there it is within the limits of annexation. And here's the current extent of the parcel at this time. So currently, this property is being zoned as agricultural. This is not recognized within the city's zoning code. So it is undergoing a concurrent zone change number 1045, to a variety of zones, including corridor mixed use 1, neighborhood mixed use, mixed residential 1, and mid-century neighborhood, as well as public 1 for parkland, in order to bring the parcel into conformance. Here's another kind of greater vicinity of the lot. Here's the current, here's the postings we made on the property. As it is currently undeveloped, we posted at the closest road available for us to access. So this is facing south toward the property. This is facing southwest. We are facing directly westward along the road, facing directly eastward, and then facing north to the opposite side of the street. So this annexation, through our staff research has shown it has met the current criteria for our annexation policy. It is within the limits of annexation, as we previously discussed. The annexation agreement will cover being able to provide adequate city services to the parcel within a mutually agreed upon time. Any existing or proposed public improvements within the area will need to meet city standards. All property owners within the area will need to sign a waiver of right to protest the creation of special improvement districts. All residential property owners within the area to be annexed must either create or join an existing park maintenance district. Residential densities planned for the development will need to match the overall average minimum density per acre as required by the growth policy. As you previously saw in my brief overview of the zoning, we're going to have a variety of housing zones and densities available for development at that time. And then lastly, the annexed area will need to conform to the goals of the growth policy. And likewise, as before, we have identified the strong neighborhoods goals as well as the home-based goals being applicable for this annexation.
Okay, part two, zone change 1045. This is the planned neighborhood development process for zone changes that are annexing property of 10 acres or more into the city. They can also be used optionally for property that is being rezoned and redeveloped already within the city. That's 10 acres or more. It helps the city decide how to build new neighborhoods that are walkable, sociable, resilient, have services nearby, and it allows phasing of annexation. So for example, they're asking for the entire 50 acres that has frontage on Central Avenue. There's another parcel south of here that is, the owner has an option to buy within the next 2 years. That could come in as another P&D and annexation in the future. But it allows phasing of an annexation for each parcel that comes in. So if they're not ready to develop all 114 acres, they don't have to annex all 114 acres if it was 114 acres. So they can leave those carrying costs of bringing property into the city off the plate, so to speak, but do the zoning all at once. So the zoning is there, but it's not shown on the county map until they say we're ready for phase 2, and we bring an ordinance forward that puts that new zoning that's already approved in place for the property. It also provides more detail on how these neighborhoods are going to function, how the access will be located, how the streets will intersect, whether they be public or private streets, and how they connect to adjacent property. So those are just a few of the benefits of doing the planned neighborhood development process. It uses all of our existing zone districts, and each, I went backwards, sorry. So there are 6 zone districts proposed for this 50-acre parcel, including commercial zones, corridor mixed use, and neighborhood mixed use zones along the frontage of Central Avenue. You can't really see it. It's called Road B on the map here, but that will be 44th Street West. And although 44th Street West isn't a straight north-south road, it takes a jog to the east and then goes south, where it will align with an existing half right-of-way for 44th Street West. City engineering preferred that they plat it this way based on their plans for improvements in the future to Central Avenue and where best to locate that 44th Street West. It is a collector street. It is not an arterial street, But where you have collector streets and arterial streets intersecting, mixed uses, corridor or neighborhood mixed uses are preferred along an arterial street frontage. Both of those zone districts do allow mixing uses of residential and commercial. Recent state law says where you have a mixed-use zone or a commercial zone, you have to allow multi-unit development. So that'll be coming forward as a code change in the near future, but that's a state law already. Just south of there, we have NX2 zoning that's proposed in a kind of a half T there that kind of wraps around the NX1 zoning, which is the largest area of the parcel and zone, and it's almost 22 acres of NX1. NX2 is the 2 to 8 unit development, and NX1 is the 1 to 4 unit development style. Next, we have on the west side of the property, N2, shown with some private roads, not with a public road. The public roads are shown with the dash line in the middle and solid lines on the edges. And then last but not least is the public 1 zoning, which brackets what will be Bell Avenue when and if it connects to the existing Bell Avenue to the east. This parcel is non-contiguous. In other words, there is no contiguous city property to connect roads to. And so Bell Avenue will have to wait until the adjacent property to the east decides to develop either in the county or the city to connect that street. For now, there is proposed a stub street that will connect eventually Bell Avenue, but it's not there yet. Also, there are obviously the Road I, which is the South Road, east-west, has all that frontage on the adjacent lot in the county, and that provides access and connection to that property, as well as 2 north-south roads. So it's well connected, it's well platted out or shown as the neighborhood connects. The one issue that did come up from the developer during the zoning commission hearing was that he wished he could have a floating zone for P1, because generally at the time of annexation and P&D development, they're not sure where all of the public parkland will be placed. So for example, if he wants to put a large park centrally located here, but he's not sure yet whether that's going to fit into the design, he'd have to come back and rezone that to public 1 in the future, if that happens during a subdivision or a master site plan. So zoning at public 1 is important, 1, because it informs everybody around that that is intended to be used for open space and parks. 2, it prevents, if it ends up being a private park, from some future owner deciding, you know, I'm tired of this park business, I want to get out of it, and I'm just going to take out all the equipment and grass, and I'm going to build this of whatever the underlying zoning is, whether that's N3 or NX1 or what have you. So it's unpredictable that way. So, you know, it's not something that the statutes allow now, but it's something that we can consider kind of put in a holding bin for future, if the statutes change, if the growth policy update allows us to do such a thing. Anyway, that's a lot about zoning. The Zoning Commission did conduct its public hearing as forwarding a recommendation of approval based on their findings of the 10 review criteria. They found that this is compatible with the growth policy in the West Billings Neighborhood Plan. It's hard when you're not contiguous with city or urban development to make something compatible, but I think they've done a good job trying to do just that on this property. The lot to the south may become the next phase of infill and P&D, and connecting that to existing city limits, which are to the south of that property at Lenhart Square. So That is the zoning commission's recommendation. There's your review criteria. And again, the zoning map that shows the surrounding zonings and where the city limits are. They're not too far away, but they're not contiguous yet.
Okay. If that's the end of your presentation, thank you, Nicole and Hunter. Questions for Hunter and Nicole before we go to the joint public hearing? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Nicole. So you said that the two accesses will only be onto Central at this time?
Yes, let's go back to the map. Right, so when a developer brings in a preliminary design or concept design, usually, and because of the access management policy of the city, those access points are determined so that there isn't any confusion or changes after the fact. So these are the two access points. And I'm going to look back to Mr. Dalton. He's doing something else, but he'll tell you that that is the case, that those locations were done in conjunction with the city engineer.
Okay, so Mayor, my question is, we're already getting complaints about the traffic on Central, high speed and all this. Will this generate a traffic study at all, or?
Oh, yes.
Okay, but will it need eventually maybe a light there? Because people will want to turn left and there's no way they can do that. Just a thought.
Yeah, the Central Avenue, this segment between Shiloh and 48th is identified in the 2016 multimodal West End study that the city and county did together as a place where congestion is going to occur and already occurs in some cases. And they recommend a corridor improvement at a future year, as well as either a signal or a roundabout at Central and 48th. So those are already contemplated, already known. As you know, next year you have put a project on the table to build Grand Avenue between Shiloh and 62nd, which is a long time coming, but also has the same sort of checkerboard problem that we have on Grand exists on Central. So there's county, city, and so that's why it's nice to have a West End multimodal plan that says, hey, city and county, you're going to have issues on these roads and then on these corridors and these intersections.
Okay, Councilor Rupsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, just a couple questions just to make sure I understood what you said correctly. That Road H, is that what's 44th?
I think it's Road B and then H.
B, okay, B off of Central and then that's where it is. Okay, so that'll be 48th.
44th.
44th, sorry. And then you said in the N2 zone, those will be private roads, but they will be connected to the west, right?
Yep. That's what they're proposing.
At some point when the property to the west develops.
Right. The city does not prohibit the connection of private road to public road and private road to public road on both ends of it.
Sure.
It may be something that the city engineering division wants to consider in their access management policy in a future update that that private roads should not have to connect because it always causes issues, especially when you have a neighborhood that connects to public here and public here, or public here and public here, and people want to use that transportation connection, especially if traffic really increases. You'll see proposals come forward from people in neighborhoods that say, hey, it's a private road, but it's the only connection between this subdivision and that subdivision. So it's something to consider in the future.
Do you know at all, maybe this would be a better question for the developer, why this one particular section of the property, they were looking for private roads, but the rest public?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it's so that they had a little more flexibility by not drawing lots. just yet. But I'm sure that the agent has an answer for that.
Great, I'll ask them. And if, just one more?
Please.
And so, Nicole, the multi-use path that'll go along Central, obviously, this is, as you said, it's not continuous from Central all the way to Shiloh. And in front of a couple of the subdivisions, Legends and
Twin Pines?
Yes, Twin Pines, sorry. There are those sidewalks that are butted right up against the fence. Is the plan when that eventually ends up getting built, do those sidewalks are going to be there? Or are we going to have this weird kind of thing of oddly placed sidewalks right along and merging into multi-use paths? Are those sidewalks going to be rebuilt when Central is eventually done as multi-use paths? We have a continuous multi-use trail there?
I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
But Debbie Melling is here.
Okay, wonderful.
Debbie, you want to comment?
Sure, we've done that on a lot of projects like Malawi this year, 32nd last year, where we just widen those sidewalks so they tie in with the path.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for staff? Councilmember Kulik?
Mayor, I have my hand up.
Oh, thank you. Councilmember Gillick, why don't we defer to Councilmember Neese, and we'll come back to Councilmember Gillick. Councilmember Neese, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Nicole, my question for you is, here's my concern is similar to what Councilmember Roops has asked about the connectivity to the, I think that's to the west on the N2 property. And also to the south, I believe it is, because I'm not sure, I mean, one of the things is the first developer in on this type of land where there's no development around it, they set the pattern for future development and connectivity. And I'm really concerned about having private roads in there where a lot of times they're put in the sidewalks, sometimes they're not there, or they're very narrow, or the roads are narrow. And I prefer to see if we're, again, building these things, we need to really have the city streets and, accessibility in that. So I'm a little concerned about the connectivity. It looked like we were going to have two connections to the west, and now it looks like it's narrowed down to just the one. And then to south, I'm not sure where those connectivities, with that road I, it looks like they could have connectivity anywhere along the south, which is promising, but not under the N2. Can you address how we look at this and if policy can be made to really make this have a better connectivity? Because I like the overall plan. I just don't like the connectivity to the south and to the west.
Well, the connectivity to the south has two north-south roads and all of Road I. Road A is kind of straddles the zoning line between the N2 and the NX2. So all of that frontage on Road A where the N2 is located is public. I haven't seen the major subdivision yet, and this was proposed and brought forward, at least a few months ago. So they probably had more thought going into how the street plan lays out. And I think that this provides a lot of connectivity as opposed to some of the other P&Ds that have come forward that have provided only one connection to adjacent undeveloped property. Our subdivision regulations also require connectivity to adjacent undeveloped property. I would ask that the developer's agent address the issue of private right-of-ways that go to the west.
Yeah, that would be helpful to hear from them to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, is Craig with us, or somebody who wants to comment on that? And can you repeat the issue for him? Did you want him to comment on it?
Oh, yes, I think that have you heard that?
Yeah, I heard.
Okay.
I didn't know
Do you want him to comment now or during the public hearing?
Why don't we have him comment on it now, and if he's got any
Okay.
other presentation, we'll get that, and then people can comment if they've got something during the public comment period.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Yeah, so regarding the connection to the west, we are proposing N2. Currently, we aren't showing public roads in there because, at this, like Nicole kind of mentioned, that we have a pretty good idea what we're going to do, but we're not fully there yet. There is still potential we might do public roads in that. But a lot of that is driven by the market, and a lot of the lot sizes and the space is driven by the zoning code of which we can fit buildings on. So the densities that they may be looking for can also dictate the method that we choose to try to develop some of these properties. In regards to the street widths within any kind of master site development, we're still building 34-foot wide streets, which is the same width of a residential road that we have in the subdivision regulations for any local residential area. So the street width is the same. I do agree that there aren't as many guidelines that are outlined for master sites when it comes to sidewalks, park spaces. However, that's something that the council and staff would need to put out in front of us. So, we can get into that a little bit further, but if I can stop and pause there to see if I've answered Councilmember Neese's question.
Councilmember Neese, did you want to comment? And again, just a reminder, this is only annexation. These lines are not binding on anybody, but the zoning, okay.
Yeah, no, I understand it's only annexation, and that's where I think annexation is the time where if we're going to condition any property for anything, that's the time we have to have this conversation. And just to clarify, you mentioned, so you're not sure if you're going to have public or private roads in there. The sidewalks, I think you mentioned just at the end there, I kind of missed what you said about the sidewalks. So the communication remote is a little rough today.
Yeah, so I was just stating that when it comes to master sites, there aren't as many guidelines put in code that dictate what shall be done inside of master site developments regarding sidewalks and regarding park space.
Okay. Yeah, I think that does clarify that, so that if we were to indicate that in the annexation agreement, that we would want city standard sidewalks throughout the development, whether it's private roads or not, then that's something that you would have to conform to, as I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Neese. We'll move to Councilmember Gulick. Craig, don't go away. Did you have any questions for Craig, or should we release him?
Well, yeah, probably so. I guess
so. Stay. Probably so. Go.
Stay.
Stay. Okay.
Yeah, I think my question also regarded the N2 section there, and I guess. And I need to, so I think it's a good, layout for, the zoning, I have no objection to the zoning, and that's what we are really voting on. But I think your street layout for the public looks good. Has, pretty fine grain. I like that. I am a little concerned about the potential of there being private roads there, but partly it's also, I don't really quite understand enough about them. With the private road, is there ability to limit access by the public then on that? And if so, potentially, people from an adjacent neighborhood, kids trying to go to a school or something like that would not be able to have the connectivity? Is that a potential issue?
Nicole, can you comment? It's always my understanding that there's a public easement, but anybody want to comment on that? From staff?
Debbie's probably the best one to answer this question.
It depends a little bit on how we write it. In the past, we've had some that have been able to limit access, and then other ones we've done an easement underneath it that says there's public access for different things. So I think it can be limited. Gina may have a different opinion, but we've seen them limited in the past.
Okay.
Follow-up question, Debbie. If it is a private and in terms of city utilities and your ability to maintain them or to have like a, I don't know, a loop type system, does that inhibit the ability, would a private street limit your access to them?
So whenever we have utilities, we always make sure we have access to the entire utility system to be able to access them. Where it becomes a little bit strange is if we have a water line or a sewer line fail under a city sidewalk or a city road, we're maintaining our own infrastructure and we're replacing our own road and our own sidewalk. But if it's under a private one, there's different rules on what we have to replace and how we have to replace it. So it adds a little bit of complexity to it, but we do have it in many places as long as we have an easement and it defines that.
Go ahead.
Why do developers like to do private roads as opposed to public when the public is, more responsible for maintaining them in the future and whatnot?
I am probably not going to be the right one to answer that. I know why I think, there's lot lines, there's setbacks, that kind of thing, that sometimes it helps to have the private. But I'm going to let developers, representatives, and these guys answer that.
Yeah, so the distinguish between doing a master site and doing public roads, it does have to do with setbacks. When you have a 56-foot right-of-way, your setback is starting back from that point back, where when we do some of these master site projects, we're able to bring those closer to the roads and can help us improve our densities. Additional, with the new zoning code, I would say that for a development like this, that's why I'm saying I'm not sure, because in N2, the master site doesn't really benefit this project as much as, say, something that has NX3 or NX2 with a lot more units involved. When you have that kind of situation, having a site that's really kind of contained is a lot easier and more cost-effective to build with private utilities and private streets. So I understand the concern, and I don't think that this is fully intended to go through a major subdivision. And at that time, with the notes taken from this annexation, there can be a total discussion about a public road connection to the west. What we were really trying to do, working with city staff and from some of the stuff that we've heard from the council, is trying to limit these straight shot roads through, because they become speedways, and trying to introduce turns. That's why we don't have Bell Avenue going straight through. The initial concept had Bell Avenue coming in and just going straight out. Now we're going to have it come in and force somebody to turn. The same thing goes for Road B coming in, which would be the 44th Street connection. That's intentional to have somebody come in and be forced to turn, as opposed to, particularly if the future Southern Phase Annex is in, that turning into just a straight raceway off of Central Avenue. So there is intention in this layout to try to help some of the traffic calming. I hear some of the connection statements that the council's making, so we'll take that under consideration.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kennedy? Is this for staff or for Greg?
Yeah, for staff.
For staff, Nicole or Hunter? Or?
Nicole. Nicole, help me with this for a minute.
Okay.
I'm from the old school. We used to have the approval of the annexation and then the zone change, and then they come back with the plat, correct?
Right.
So a lot of what we're doing tonight is just the zone change and the annexation, and then we will see this back again.
That is the developer's intent. But in our P&D zone change process, they have to show us a proposed street layout. And the zoning has to match with either the center lines or the rear property lines of that street layout. Because right now, the block perimeter and the block faces are in zoning. We're soon going to move that to subdivision. So we'll be much happier that that's in subdivision and not in zoning. But that's the way it's written now, and that's why you
Okay.
see a street layout.
Thank you. That clarifies it. I was wondering why we were seeing all the streets and everything for the annexation and the zoning. Thank you.
Councilor Ripsis, a follow-up on that?
Yes, I'm sorry, could you please clarify that? I thought it was a key advantage of the planned neighborhood development that we included street layouts and locations of P1 spaces and all that kind of stuff. Are you saying that we're going to get rid of that and we won't see that until the plat?
No.
Okay.
What we're going to move is the block perimeter and the block faces over to the subdivision rules. We'll keep the street layout, we'll keep the Park 1, the P1 locations, all of that will stay in the P&D process, but those perimeter measurements and block face will be done at the time of subdivision.
Okay, any other questions for staff or the developers represented before we move to a public hearing? Not seeing anything from council, so this is a public hearing joint public hearing on items 5A and 5B, annexation 2402 and zone change 1045. If anybody would like to comment, please come to the podium.
Yeah, I would like to make just a few more comments. I think all the council members have an amendment that was proposed by Mayor Cole in front of them. You know, like Council Member Aspenlighter voiced earlier, I can sense, and we have some growing to frustration in the development community, having some of these things pop up at this stage. I mean, we're given a set of rules as developers, and we come in and we abide by those rules. We show you maps that we've done. We meet subdivision regulations. We meet all the zoning regulations, and then we go through your advisory committees, you know, not having heard any of these types of comments, to get to a council meeting and get an amendment of a phone call from staff on a Friday stating, hey, we're looking to make this amendment to your meeting. From fairness standpoint, to be able to have a developer be able to look that over and give a real thought to it, because it could have impacts. You know, this one's a parkland one, but there's been other times where I've taken zoning through, and I've been standing up here and had a council member ask me if the developer was willing to accept a condition that they made right here on the floor that could have, you know, significant impacts to their development. So I think I hear and I understand what the mayor is proposing here. Master site plans, as I mentioned before, they don't have as many guidelines when it comes to sidewalks and park spaces. But that should be handled in the regulations, so that when we come in with proposals, that is already addressed on our proposal and not just rammed into a case-by-case development. So that's my piece on that. One of the things I would really like to strike from what the mayor was proposing is the minor subdivision requirement. For instance, minor subdivisions do not have a parkland requirement. This is a large parcel, and it could inhibit our ability to set this thing up through a master planning development stages, i.e. doing filings of the subdivision and getting things set up on a master plan basis. Furthermore, if we were to subdivide the commercial properties on the top, there is not a parkland regulation in place for commercial subdivisions. So that language would be something I would propose to be striked regarding minor subdivisions triggering, memorializing the parkland at that time. As I mentioned, the developer fully intends to come in with a major subdivision, so that we can address that. But in general, I think that stands to muddy a lot more things as we move through the development of this property than assist. A couple other points, though, that I'd like to point out is that the city's made an essential investment along the central corridor. They extended a sewer along Monad Drain that was part of a work order last year, all the way out to almost all the way out to the 48th Street. It's actually at the southwest corner of the southern piece here, and they have a work order in place right now to extend water down Central Avenue to connect this. Central Avenue is a very, very important corridor to the city. I do understand Councilmember Boyette's concerns about traffic. However, we will be doing a traffic impact study as part of that major subdivision review, which will identify some impacts and likely require some contributions from this developer to some of the intersections around. I will also say that Central already has traffic problems like you mentioned, and Central is not going to get fixed by the county. We know that. It's only going to come from city investment into that corridor. It's not on the CIP currently, but a project like this will elevate that up the ladder to become more of a priority in the future. I don't think anybody really took issue with the zoning we're proposing, but this is some of that missing middle zoning that we've been looking for. Super high density to the south of us in the farmstead, and then trying to blend in a little bit more with the single family county subdivisions that are surrounding us. I think that pretty much covers what I have for any comments, and I would take any other questions or comments that I have from the council.
Very good, thank you. Feel free if you've got questions for Craig as well. Okay, very good, thank you. Any other public comment on items 5A or 5B before we close the public hearing? Any further comments? Seeing no one coming forward, we'll close the public hearing on 5A and 5B. Council, any other questions for staff or development or the representative of the developer before we ask for a motion on 5A? I don't see anything. So is there, Councilor?
Make a comment is that, yeah, I support the zoning as proposed, and that's, what's really before us. I appreciate that the developer, and I like the staff to make note that also that there is some concern among at least some council members of the connection to the west, and just making sure when as this project goes forward, that is considered. So appreciate that, but thank you. I will be supporting this.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rasmussen?
Just wanted to note officially for the record, I'll be recusing myself from all of agenda item 5.
Very good. Appreciate that. Councilmember Tidswell?
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve a resolution conditionally approving annexation 24-02 as recommended by staff.
Second.
We have a motion, second by Councilmember Kennedy. Would either Councilmember Tidswell or Kennedy like to speak to your motion? Okay. Other comment on the motion? Any other discussion on the motion before you proceed to a vote?
I have
Councilmember Neese, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. During the discussion, there was some questions, and I can't remember who asked, but Debbie addressed it, that it's possible that they can bar public access to that private road. So is this annexation agreement that we're approving now, again, this is where we need to make that change in language if we're going to make it, to make sure that public has access to that road.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese. I'll let staff comment if they would like to, but I'll just point out that we're actually not approving the annexation agreement, just approving the annexation of the whole kit and caboodle property. So that kind of issue that you were talking about could, I suppose, be addressed in the annexation agreement, but that's not up until item 5C.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I'm assuming staff, that's okay? Nobody wants to add to that? Okay, Nicole's indicating what I said is accurate, so we'll leave it that. Any other discussion before we proceed to vote on the motion to approve item 5A? Okay, so that is the motion. If in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes item 5A. 5B, Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to offer a motion unless anybody has anything they want to go into before. All right. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1021 and adopt the findings of the 10 criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Councilmember Boyette indicates a second.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead and restate your motion, please.
Yes, it's all the same except it's 10:45. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1045 and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the zoning commission.
Now Councilmember Boyette wants to withdraw his second because he can't go along with that. No, just kidding. He's still on board for the second. We've got a motion. Would either of you like to address your motion?
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to say something.
Councilmember Dees, go ahead.
Yeah, I really appreciate this development coming forward. I think this is one of the, as Councilmember Gulick said, I really like the layout as far as the zoning. I like the idea where he's opening traffic calming in some of these areas. And so I think this developer has hit a lot of spots that we've seen come to us before in the past that have been kind of problematic, or at least we thought they were. And so I do appreciate that, and I'll support this motion. I think these are the type of developments that we want to see coming forward more often. Although there is, as I stated, there are a couple issues I'd like to see addressed, but it sounds like the developer is open to address those during the planning phase.
Okay, very good. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. This is motion is for approval, item 5B. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That then brings us to 5C, which is the proposed annexation agreement. I'm not sure who at the staff level is taking us through that one. Debbie.
We don't have a presentation on this other than to say if we want to address the private or the public access through private roads, we can certainly do that. Other than that, everything's included that would be included under a site development except right of way. So it's a pretty straightforward annexation agreement.
Okay, very good. Questions for staff or others? Councilmember Boyette.
So Nicole or Debbie, I live on a private street, which is great for me, but it's not good for the public. Do we really want to have private streets in the city going forward, or are we going to allow that, or?
So I think we need to talk about that as a bigger policy issue. We used to allow private roads that could be narrow and had very little access and that sort of thing. So we have increased the requirements on public roads or private roads in the last 5 years, but we still are allowing them. So certainly a conversation.
Chris, you want to comment?
I'll just add that generally, sometimes there are exceptions, but generally I think they are a bad idea. We have had instances in Billings where some of these private streets the subdivisions have threatened to block those streets off of public access to drive through them. Had they done it, they would have created much more significant kind of traffic problems for neighboring subdivisions and things like that. I can't say that we never should have them, but that is a concern. Second concern is they all pay assessments, whether it's on a private street or not. So I've witnessed over my career complaints like, why do we have to pay street assessments? I live on a private street, but I'm paying the same as everybody else. So that's kind of a policy call on your guys' end, but I do think they should be extraordinarily rare. And Debbie and I mentioned, I think the code, we should consider removing that from the code.
Okay, questions? Councilmember Gillick? Or other comments before we?
Well, and this is not quite germane to the discussion here, but I think, I agree that, I think private roads, I have some concerns about them, but I do think some of the things that they provide in terms of a narrower, smaller setbacks is something we should be considering for our public streets as well. So I think that's partly what's driving people to go to private streets. And so that's something else I think in terms of our policy discussion that we want to be considering is whether or not we can allow that.
Okay, thank you. Council, how do you want to proceed? I guess what I'm looking for is a motion on, pursuant to the staff recommendation on 4C. Just so you know, what I would then do is, if there was a base motion, so to speak, made, I would come back to propose the amendment.
We haven't voted yet, have we, on this motion?
There is no motion on 4C yet.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'm, or I'm sorry, 5C, I apologize, 5C. So if there was a base motion, I would come back, with a proposed amendment. That way, if that passes, it proceeds as an amended motion. If it fails, then we just still have the base motion in hand. Councilmember Neese had his hand up, and then Councilmember Tisdale.
Yeah, Mayor, I'll wait till there's a motion on the floor so we can.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Tisdale?
I move to approve an annexation agreement with Brown Billings LLC as recommended by staff.
Second by Councilmember Kennedy. Okay. Councilmember Neese, did you want to comment before I proceed with my proposed amendment?
Mayor, I guess I did want to comment or ask, maybe legal, based on this annexation agreement, or maybe from Debbie, where we can make sure we protect the public's right to access these roads and where they would not be able to get blocked. Where's the best way to do that? What's the best way to do that in this agreement? I believe the developer has a good plan. If they're private streets, he may put in public streets, but I think we want to make sure that public access is protected either way, whether it puts in private or public.
Okay, Debbie is coming to the podium.
We can certainly put a public easement in the annexation agreement, or a requirement that we add one. We don't have to get specific about where it goes, but we could say that we need to have a public easement in the annexation agreement, or when it comes forward for development. So in the annexation agreement.
In the annexation agreement, so that would be pertinent at this time. Councilmember Neese, is what Debbie is saying.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, she's saying that the annexation agreement before us would be an appropriate time to put a requirement that these be public streets.
Okay, and so then I'd like to make a motion to have that inserted.
Or, I'm sorry, requiring not public ownership, but public access through an easement.
Public access, yes, easement for the roads.
Thank you for that clarification. And I apologize, Councilmember Neese, how did you follow up on that?
I'm sorry, I think I was trying to make a motion to insert the language to allow public right-of-way or access to the private roads if they develop them.
Okay, so there is a motion. You heard the terms of it, Councilmember Ripsis.
Could I just ask a question of the proposer?
Why don't we do that, and then I'll determine whether we have a second, but we'll make it quite fairly short. Go ahead,
I'm willing to second it if the size of that easement doesn't extend beyond the width of the roads, if they make them as a private road. I think he's frozen.
Can you clarify your question again, Councilmember Ripsis?
We heard the developers say that the easements will be like 56 feet or something, much wider than the road itself. And I'd like to make sure that we don't do that. If they become private, if they're built as private roads, I just want to make sure that we have access to drive on those private roads, not for 10 feet on each side of them.
Right.
Okay. If that's your intention, that the easement would be the width of the road, not extend beyond that, then I would second that.
Okay, so we have a motion for an amendment to Councilmember Tidswell's base motion before you. Discussion on the motion. Either Councilmembers Neese or Ripsis, did you want to speak to your proposed amendment further?
No, I will say that I think what I'm trying to do is make sure it's not undue burden on the developer if he puts in private roads, but yet protect the public's right to be able to use those roads without them being blocked in the future. And that's really, I'm not expecting other than just for them to be able to use the roads. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Joy on the proposed amendment.
Thank you. I have a question for Director Melling. So I'm thinking of some different instances around town where there have been private roads, and I won't go back to the Poet Streets. That comes to mind, where there was very poor drainage. They were private streets, is that correct? They weren't private streets. They were, They were public streets?
They were public, just very narrow right-of-way. They had 20 to
Okay.
30 feet right-of-way.
So this is my question, actually, and it goes back to the put streets. Why do we need, if we make a smaller sized easements and allow the developer to have a private street, but some kind of caveat about public access, what might be a downside to that? So I'm thinking of drainage, but maybe I'm not correct in that. But if you don't have the same width of right-of-way, but it's a private street, but public access, what are the downsides? Do you see any downsides to that? Thank you.
So probably the biggest complaints we see on private roads is that people are unaware that they're supposed to maintain them. And also they have a hard time enforcing rules. So Montana Sapphire is a great example. They have people parking on street. It's creating problems. They call us and we can't actually do anything about some of those issues. They'll call and say, hey, we've got potholes. It's like, well, you have a private street. So a lot of people don't realize they're on a private street, and that's, Chris alluded to that earlier. So there can be some confusion, some disgruntlement through that. As far as infrastructure goes, as long as we have easements and access, the storm drainage is handled, whether it's a site development, whether it's a subdivision, we have management rules for storm drain either way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, question from Councilmember Kennedy.
Deb, doesn't a or private road become a public road after so many years of use?
That's a Gina question, but I don't believe so.
That,
Yeah,
Counselor?
I don't think it's as simple as that. There's a complex analysis that I can't give you right now, but you may be thinking of like a prescriptive use. And is that what you're talking about, prescriptive
We've had roads
easement?
that people have said were private roads, and with continuous public use, after 7 years, they were actually public roads. So I was just wondering if that applied to in the city and annexation.
I would not want to give you an answer about that without researching the entire analysis. You're referring to prescriptive use, and so I don't have that entire analysis at the tip of my tongue to give you. I apologize. I can't give you a yes or no.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll just comment on because this goes to a point that Councilor Aspenleiter made earlier and that the representative made. It's a process question. You know, when we make these changes in the annexation agreement, it's kind of a blunt axe approach that catches subdividers or the developers by surprise, as you heard. And there may be fine tuning that would be appropriate. The problem is we only get one shot here to do this. And so if this passes, I would encourage staff to work with the developer. It might be that they want to improve this language, come up with better language. And we can always go back and amend the annexation agreement. I would encourage the council to be open to that, given that the process. For the benefit of the public, and also to address a point that Craig made earlier, from the developer's point of view, they've been dealing with this for months. and then they get before us and, hey, we pop something on them. And from their perspective, hey, this should have come out months ago. Well, yeah, but understand where the city council comes from. We're the ultimate decision makers, and we are actually affirmatively encouraged to avoid the process early on. These are quasi-judicial determinations. We're actively encouraged not to go to zoning commission meetings, not to engage with the developer, not to engage with the public, to not do anything until we have heard this presentation. Now, we get the 100-page, 200-page packet on Monday night. And we start looking at it, maybe. In my case, on this parks issue, which I'll raise, I immediately raised that within about 24 hours with staff. So I had actually had it for 24 hours, not for many, many months, but 24 hours. So people need to just understand how this process works. And it's not that something is being popped on, that the council has had this. We've often had it only for matters of hours before we've even know anything about these developments. And maybe we need to change that process, but that is the way the process works. But further discussion on the immediate proposed amendment to have staff add language somewhere, it doesn't say exactly where, that would require a public access easement along these roads, if they are not public roads. Any further discussion on that before we proceed to a vote on it? Okay. Is the motion clear? If in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. Nay. Motion passes unanimously, or not unanimously, all voting in favor, myself voting in the opposition, Councilmember Absent-Leiter not participating in the vote. If that concludes that proposed amendment, I'll move on to my proposed park amendment. So, Council, you got emails at the end of last week raising this issue. The concern that I had is that this is potentially 250 unit or so residential development that will have kids and others who like to have parks. The park dedication requirement is only triggered, the larger 11% park dedication requirement is only triggered by a major subdivision. And so there is the theoretical possibility where we have large developments like this, that there will never be a major subdivision, and hence never an opportunity to get park land or cash in lieu of park land. And so we have an opportunity in the annexation agreement to address that issue, I would say. And so I distributed language to staff, and it was passed on to the developer, that would require that land. And I guess so that the record is clear, I distributed specific language. And rather than, and everybody's got a copy of it up here, but for the benefit of the public, I think I should read it. And this would be my motion to add this to a new paragraph in the annexation agreement that would be titled Park/Open Space. So the amendment would read as follows. In the event that the developer/owner chooses not to go through a major subdivision, the owner/developer will provide in-kind parkland dedication in an amount equal to or greater than what would be required under state law if the developer tract were approved as a major subdivision. This includes the in-kind dedication of parkland at a proportion of 11% of the net area of residential lots or dwelling units being created that are smaller than 1/2 acre in lot area per lot or dwelling unit. In accordance with Section 27800 of City Zoning Regulations for Planned Neighborhood Development, PNDs, the developer has provided and zoned a minimum of 2.9% of the net subdivision area as parkland or open space. This area is credited toward the parkland dedication requirements. The subdivider must provide for the balance of 8.1% of the net area to satisfy these requirements. This parkland dedication shall be memorialized if, and then I'm going to delete a minor plat based on Craig's comments earlier, and continue, shall be memorialized if a master site plan for multi-unit development is filed involving any portion of the developer tract. The above described requirements shall be moot and have no further effect if the developer tract is approved as a major subdivision that is subject to state statutory park dedication requirements. Any parkland dedicated per this paragraph or state law shall be developed and maintained by developer, a property owners association established by developer, or park construction and maintenance districts initiated by developer and approved by the city. So that is my motion. I'll make a brief additional comment if there is a second on the motion.
Second.
Councilmember Joy makes the second, so I will just proceed by addressing the points that Councilmember Aspenleiter made before, which I think are perfectly legitimate, which is when we want to make changes like this, which are not insubstantial, when do we make them, right? I wouldn't disagree that in a perfect world we would have weeks, months of developing input and refining this. It's just we haven't done that in the past when it comes to annexation agreements. We have one shot here. As a practical matter, council needs to know, and you heard it from Craig, their plan is to do a major subdivision. So in theory, this will become moot if that happens. This is only a belt and suspenders thing to have it there if there is no major subdivision. If there is a major subdivision, that'll trigger the park dedication, normal park dedication requirements. But I did think that there was some value to be had in having this discussion and also developing a certain amount of, call it muscle memory, that this is an issue that's out there if there isn't a major subdivision, and this would be a placeholder. The developer has not had a lot of time to deal with this, so if they wanted to come back and make amendments to this in the annexation agreement or address things in the subdivision improvement agreement, boy, I'm fucking likely going to be just fine with that, because it is difficult for them when they just hear about these things. But again, for the reasons I said before, that's kind of the way the process works. So anyway, those are my comments. I'll kick it back to the council to debate the proposed amendment. Councilmember Boyette.
I'd like to see the developer again one more time. I just want to make sure that you've read this and understood what the proposal is.
Yes, I've read it, and I'm the agent, but I've discussed it with the developer, and like I said, we were fully intending to do a major subdivision, so I do appreciate Mayor Cole striking the minor subdivision requirement, because that with a big track like this, sometimes we do minors just to get things set up a little bit better for filings, like I said. So as this is proposed today, I think it's fine to be included at this point to help facilitate this going through. I would just encourage council in the future to maybe consider, discussing this with staff and maybe finding ways that we can put this in some of the regulations so we can handle this on the front end a little bit better.
Okay, and then also if the council down the road says no more private streets going forward, you could live with that too?
The private street thing, I will admit that I think that this layout, could, when we get to the subdivision, I fully expect that something would come up that there's some kind of connection that would come over to the west. Maybe that's just having a public right-of-way connection to the west at some place. Eliminating private streets, I do think there still can be some benefit with these master site projects, like I mentioned, because it might change where we go to working with Debbie and the staff, but say for instance, we've done some of them up in the Zimmerman Home Place subdivision. Well, those are technically private streets, but they're also kind of used as a parking lot as well. If we were to differentiate and say this is a parking lot area and this is a private street, that would take some. But if we go to all public streets through those types of developments, it's going to make it really challenging to, one, meet parking requirements and flow. And I don't think city staff is going to, if they allow for things like parking stalls, overhead parking canopies and things like that, which they wouldn't in a public right-of-way. So maybe it's just a differentiator. I think it's just some language that we're talking about of, is this a parking lot or is this a private street? So when they're self-contained, I think private streets work okay. When they're kind of built into places that are isolated and there isn't a lot of through action, they can work fine. Coal Creek is an example of one that we've done in town that's got a ditch on the northern border. It's got private roads. It goes out, up, comes off Rimrock, loops back around, comes back to Rimrock. And so it is completely self-contained. There isn't any through traffic from the public. So I think the consideration would maybe just be in making sure that we have a public right-of-way that connects to the adjacent properties. But I wouldn't totally go fall in on the private road axing until we've thought through it a little bit further.
But just so you're okay with what we said?
I'm okay if we can strike the minor plat language.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Kennedy?
The problem I have with this is a change of what we're doing, and it's a policy change, and it's something that we really need to bring back. And I would ask, Mayor, if you would bring this back and we have some discussion and do a policy change so the developers and the staff know exactly what we're looking for. The concern that I have, and I appreciate the developer saying tonight that they're going to do the major subdivision and go along with this, but I think all the players need to know. So I think at this time, I can't support it, but I would like to see something come back that we have in the rules and regulations so everybody knows what they're looking at before it comes back to the council.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy, and I will not withdraw the motion based on your comments, but I endorse them wholeheartedly that these things are all good to develop with more detail with the input of developers and staff, and if we can build that into our annexation policy. Our annexation policy at this point is a fairly bare bones affair. It's better than it used to be. But that's the sort of thing that could be added into that. It also would be a time to address the larger issue of park dedication, because the problem we have in state law is it's purely based on the size of the development, which may or may not correlate to the number of dwelling units and the need for parks. In a perfect world, it seems to me that you would have a certain amount of park dedication depending on the number of dwelling units you had. And that's not the way state law works. So that's maybe something we could also do by annexation if we saw a way to do that in a way that made sense. So, but further discussion. Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I think just like we did with the allowing the public the right to use the private street on this development, that's an annexation change, and I think we've done multiple times as we learn more about the process and learn how it impacts the public. We as council have made those changes. I know sometimes it's seemingly on the fly, but it is something that's important to the public, and so something Mayor, you brought up years ago about the waivers, and so there was changes in the waiver documents and things like that. So we want to make sure that, as you said, the annexation agreements have been bare bones. The years that I've been on the council, we've made good progress in the annexation agreements and improving them, updating them. And this is just one more thing. And I would anticipate, and I didn't say this during the last motion, but not only this amendment that you're making, but the amendment that was just passed would be included in future annexation agreements to protect the right of the public to be able to use private streets, but also this park dedication you're talking about in this amendment. We've also, just to let council know, those who haven't been around as long, we often talked about, we went through rate code, we talked about how the parkland dedication was important, and probably even more important in high-dense units, high-dense areas, to make sure we had enough open space and parkland dedication. And so that was always, it has been a concern, I think, of the council to make sure we had enough of that type of agreement. So I applaud you, Mayor, for bringing this. I do expect that if there are some changes staff can bring to us to modify it, some input from developers to make this better, then I'm all for hearing that at a time. But I will support this motion, and I thank you for taking the time to have this, written in before us now.
Very good. Councilmember Ripsis, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, question for you. Last July, we had a conversation about some of the recode amendments, text amendments, and it was a long discussion about, there were parts of it that had to do with, well, how far away do parks have to be, or is there and outside the subdivision, can a park count as, not having to develop inside? But some of the clarifications were in Annex 1, Annex 2, Annex 3, how much land actually had to be dedicated when things were zoned that way. And I think it was outside the P&D process, but, those underlining zonings do have requirements for certain park, type space. I went back and looked at the minutes. I think that was delayed to a work session. Did we ever get back to that? Can you remind me where we are?
The work session. And there was no conclusion of which way the council wanted to go forward on those amendments. So those are still just hanging out there. It was a very complex issue because there are many parts to land development, annexations, subdivisions, master site plans. In the code right now for zoning, it says when you have an Annex 1, Annex 2, Annex 3 that's 3 acres or more, you shall provide open space, developed open space for that development within your development. It doesn't count whether or not there was already open space dedicated for the subdivision. It just says, if you're building multi-unit developments, you're going to provide open space when you get to 3 acres of development. That's all it says. So, and that's all that zoning does now, except for the P&D, which we talked about, is 2% enough? Should we really leave that part of it to the subdivision process or the master site plan process? Because usually master site plan is used for multi-unit development. So there was no conclusion. I have a very thick set of notes and reports and things like that, and we could probably revisit it. You will see subdivision changes coming, regulatory changes coming forward from the planning board. And those will be coming forward in April to you, I think with public hearings in May. So part of that is amending the parkland section of those subdivision regulations. So when you see that, you'll see some of the things that staff and the people have worked on that together to figure it out better.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Mayor,
you.
just a quick comment. I guess I'm not going to support this right now, and it might sound surprising to some of you. I'm kind of disappointed with how the P1 is allocated in here. It doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that we're going to have all the types of facilities that this kind of large development will require. But I think it's what's written in our code right now. They followed the process, and it does seem to me a bit challenging to put this kind of extra requirement on this one particular property where we have not done that in other properties comparable to this that have come around in the last couple of years. So I think I'm not going to support this right now, although I do appreciate you constantly raising the need for these types of open spaces and parkland in new developments. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The reason I seconded the motion and the reason I support the motion is because we do need to address this. And the process, as the mayor has described, the process for us to make a difference comes right here to this table. It isn't actually earlier in the process. And yes, I do recall the work session, and it didn't come to a conclusion. And I think that I'm pretty sure that we have subdivisions that have met our requirement, and their open space is stormwater drainage. So I do know that we have multi-family housing on the west end with kids playing in the street. Absolutely. And when we were rewriting our zoning codes, I was in a public meeting and I said, we have kids on the West End playing in the streets. We need to address this. So I support the motion and I seconded the motion because we need to move this ball. We cannot wait. And a third point I'd like to make is that thinking back to previous years on council, there haven't been nearly as many multifamily or higher density subdivisions and plans coming forward. We have seen, thinking back to my beginnings, many more single home dwellings, and that was before we created our N1, N2, N3, many more single home dwellings on big lots than we see right now. So this is just an impetus, move that football down the field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. You know I support parks. I feel like it's not about that. I can't support this either, although I think I just wanted to comment and say what did resonate with me was the idea of somehow tying this to the number of dwelling units, because I was sitting here just doing a little math, thinking about the last thing we just annexed, 1 acre. I live on a 7,000 square foot lot. It's very common in my neighborhood to have duplexes or triplexes on lots like that. You could have quite a dense area over there that isn't required to have any parkland dedication or contribute, to something nearby. So I think there's a bigger issue at play here, and I agree we need to move the ball, but for me, here, voting on a single application isn't the place. I would like to have the larger policy discussion where we actually make a decision so that these regulations are put out and it's not a surprise to people when they show up here. I totally agree with what you said about the process. You're 100% right. But I think we need to go back farther in the process for ourselves and adjust it at that point. So that's the reason why I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Very good. Further discussion on the proposed amendment before we proceed to a vote. You ready to vote? Okay, so the motion is clear. I hope it was read. You got a copy in front of you with the exception of removing the three words minor plat or. That was not part of the motion. So if you're ready to vote, just so we get an accurate count, why don't we do a little hand vote? If in favor of the proposed amendment, raise your hand. Voting in favor are council members Joy, Neese, Cole, and Boyette. If voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, council members Rupsis, Shaw, Gulick, Kennedy, and Tidswell. I think that was 5 against and 4 in favor, so the motion fails.
It failed.
So we now have before us the amended motion. Is there any further discussion on the amended motion or further amendments before we proceed to a vote, a final vote? Okay, don't see any. So the motion before you is the amended motion, which was the base motion with the public streets amendment. If in favor of the amended motion, now, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. That then concludes 5C. 5D is again the ordinance expanding the boundaries of Ward 5 in this case. No presentation. Council members down in Ward. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so we do have to have a public hearing on item 5D to add this property to Ward 5. Is there any public comment on 5D? Please come forward. Ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. No one's coming forward. There's no comment. We'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance expanding the boundary of Ward 5 as recommended by staff.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rupsis with the second. Any discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to the vote. The motion is for approval, 5D. If in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Council, it is 5-8. We'll proceed unless you want to take a break. Does anybody want to take a break? Okay. Denise, please read item 6, please. Oh, I
Okay.
apologize. Our first item up is actually 1N.
Right.
Which is the preliminary minor plat for Skyview Ridge. That, there was not going to be a presentation on that on the consent agenda, but it does seem logical that we have some sort of an explanation of what that is. You've read that in your packet. It's a two-lot minor subdivision. So I'll ask staff to give us a little bit of background on item 1N. Nicole, can you do that? Did you hear what I was saying?
No.
Okay, so I'll repeat.
Wasn't me, my apologies.
No. So item 1N is
Yes.
the next item up. This is the preliminary minor plat for Skyview Ridge. This is actually, first reading. Can you give us a brief presentation since?
Sure. Well, it's a two-lot minor subdivision. It's not a first reading, it's your only reading. These are generally on consent because there's no public hearing. There's also no public hearing with the planning board. So these are fairly straightforward. The two-lot minor is being proposed by the owner, which is the state of Montana. They do have a potential leaseholder who is part of the next item, which is zone change 1046. So typically the findings that are in the report for a subdivision approval are findings of fact, and all of the conditions that are recommended to you to approve this two-lot minor subdivision are based on those findings. So if I don't believe that you can stay within the statutory timeline for review and delay this to another meeting, that you will have to make a decision tonight unless the applicant agrees to an extension of time for that decision.
Okay,
Generally,
thank you.
these are-
And Nicole, would you agree that there isn't any technical legal connection between the subdivision and the later action for zoning or for, well, it's just a zone change, right?
Right.
I mean, they can stand alone.
They can
They may
sta-
be a practical connection in the mind of the developer, but they're not legally linked.
They're not legally linked. However, one of the conditions recommended for the subdivision approval based on the proposed use is that they do obtain the zone change that they are requesting of you tonight. So that is the way they are linked, the only way they are linked. The subdivision allows the developer to create a one access approach off of Wicks Lane, whereas there is no access approach allowed now under the subdivision. So that allows the property to be developed, essentially. And that is the reason for the subdivision.
Okay. Okay, any questions for Nicole? Again, there's no public hearing here, so I'll just be looking for a motion, but only if there aren't any questions for Nicole.
And the agent is here too, if you have any technical questions.
Okay. So if anybody has technical questions about the subdivision, you're welcome to do that.
Sure.
Councilmember Neese?
Yeah, so the reason I separated this, I wanted to talk a little bit about this because the subdivision is tied to this to the fact that they says the plat, it actually says the existing zoning is CMU2, but that's the proposed zoning or the expected zoning. And this property, this lot, and this development is along really the beginning of the inner belt loop or Skyway Drive, as it will be known in the future. And so I think that it is really important that we, as we start looking and developing some of these arterial streets, that we look at what is going to bring the highest and best use of development of this inner belt loop that's starting out. And so my concern is, and this is where I've asked staff, I don't think they don't have an answer for this yet, but when we look at the inner belt loop and we are looking at doing a minor a minor plat, what we can or can't do is kind of unknown to me, but I think we need to make sure that if this is conditioned upon it being a CMU2, I think we as council need to look at how do we want to really develop the inner belt loop. We've got the Heights, neighborhood in development now as far as the planning coming up. We have a lot of things that we're in the works on, but does the city council want to develop the inner belt loop as industrial? I don't think that's the highest and best use of this, and that's kind of what this minor plot is kind of starting it out as developing. So my thought is, and my question to staff is, can we, if we do something like this, this as one of the conditions to require, the first 100 feet adjacent to the inner belt loop to be a CMU1 instead of CMU3? Because I've heard the arguments about the difficulty of building residential homes there. I can buy into that. But to try to keep some of the industrial right off of the inner belt loop and maybe move it back, can we really try to develop this a higher business sense, a higher ability on CMU1 along the inner belt loop instead of a industrial type of a zone? Is that possible to do something like that within this type of agreement?
So I've been asking Nicole to go ahead and comment. Technically, we're talking about a subdivision here as opposed to the zoning restriction, but I guess they're kind of connected. So go ahead and comment, please.
Okay, the corridor mixed use 2 is not an industrial zone. That's just a statement of fact.
Okay.
The proposed use, some may qualify as an industrial use. However, the developer is aware, upon asking for the CMU2 zone, which is appropriate given its location under high tension lines next to a substation along a principal arterial, separated from other zones by streets, which is basically the definition of CMU2, an appropriate location, that they will have to meet the requirements of the CMU2 zone district that include doors and windows on the frontage, no overhead door access from the front street at all, that the building that faces that street will be in the build-to zone required. It can have interior doors where people access climate-controlled storage facilities, but everything else behind it that faces into the property can have overhead doors for personal storage warehousing. That's part of the uses and use standards for CMU2 for personal storage warehousing. If they weren't going to subdivide the property, then they could only build a maximum 3-acre facility. Because they're subdividing, they're going to be able to do 2 separate facilities that have to meet those same requirements, but also have additional land to develop for other CMU2 uses. So it's not an industrial zone. I think the proposed subdivision with the north-south division of the lot to create a shared access is all that's really important about the subdivision.
If they, again, I guess the question is, on this agreement, instead of the condition being successfully obtain a zone change from CMU3 to CMU2, can that be from CMU3 to CMU1 along the 100 feet of frontage along the Wicks and CMU2 in the remaining of the property?
Nicole?
No, you can't dictate zoning in a subdivision condition.
Okay.
I mean, it says it will obtain a zone change that fits the proposed use. They have chosen the CMU2 zone.
Okay.
Okay, I think we should move to this item, 1N. Is there a motion,
Then
Councilor?
I'd like to make a motion to deny item 1N.
Okay, we'll recognize that you had the separation. So the motion is to deny. Is there a second? Okay, it looks like the motion fails for lack of a second, so we'll look for another motion. Councilmember Shaw.
I move to approve item 1N, the preliminary minor plat for Skyview Ridge second filing.
Second, Councilmember Rupsis. Any discussion? Either you'd like to speak to your motion? No? Any further discussion? Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The description of this property, as described by Ms. Cromwell, sounds much more consistent with storage units than the ones I can find in Ward 3. In Ward 3, they're across from Lewis and Clark School, tucked behind Harbor Freight and housing. On South Billings Boulevard, they're, I don't know exactly what the name of that street is, they're right beside housing. So this sounds like a more appropriate situation than many of the storage units in Ward 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Again, the motion is for approval, item 1N. No further discussion appearing. We'll move to a vote. If in favor of the motion for approval, item 1N, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes with the exception of Councilmember Neese voting in the opposition. And so that concludes item 1N and brings us to item 6. Denise, would you read item number?
Recused on that one.
Oh, thank you for
record.
pointing that out. For the record, Councilmember Aspenlighter did not vote. So, Denise, please read item number 6.
Public hearing, first reading ordinance for zone change 1046, generally located at 1202 West Wicks Lane. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 review criteria.
This will be our final item, and then we will move on to public comment on anything not on our agenda tonight.
So this is zone change 1046. The current zoning of the property is NX3, which is intended for apartments of at least 5-unit buildings, but can have an unlimited number of units in those buildings so long as all the other site development requirements are met. As stated previously, the property is owned by the state of Montana. It will stay within that ownership. All property owned by the state of Montana is held in land trust, and so only leases may be issued for property. This property was annexed and zoned within the city more than a decade ago. I think it was 2008 when this was annexed and zoned. Because of the nature of risk and leases, and the location of the property, no developments have occurred. This is the first proposal that has made it to this point in the process. And the proposal is primarily based to go to CMU2 for development of personal storage warehouses because of the nature of the soils up here in this subdivision. So CMU2 allows all these different kinds of uses, retail uses, mixed uses, business services, storage, restaurants, building and siting requirements are required. And when you're doing personal storage in CMU2, all these other standards also apply. So no exterior overhead doors may face a street unless it's located behind another structure. Security fencing must be located behind exterior landscaping. Overhead doors must be screened from the street, and buildings that face the front street, in this case West Wicks Lane, must meet those CMU2 building requirements for doors and windows and other facade treatments. So when I talk about soils here, I'm talking about Eagle sandstone. And there are very shallow bedrock areas on this state subdivision land. The property that's already zoned CMU1 further to the east in this subdivision has some of the outcropping of bedrock. So the likelihood of any development on those 4 lots is very low. It would involve blasting, and it's uncertain whether any stormwater management system could be installed in an efficient or financially viable way. This parcel has less of that than some of the other parcels with frontage on West Wicks Lane. It is also adjacent to a major substation for Northwestern Energy, the city's 800 megahertz communications tower, a 200-foot tall communications tower just to the west of that. It is across the street from Skyview High School. It is across the street from some neighborhood development there. But the CMU2 is not inappropriate when it's separated by a major arterial street, particularly if we impose those restrictions and development requirements on the front of that property. I think that we have so few examples of good personal storage warehouse development that nobody can envision it. What is this going to look like? We don't have a lot of demand for climate-controlled storage warehousing, which is the front of this first building that faces West Wicks Lane would have to have a climate-controlled facility at the front. Everything else could be non-climate controlled, but the front of that building and the entry to this property is going to have to look better than anything we've ever experienced before because of our zoning. The Zoning Commission is recommending approval to you based on their findings that it meets the growth policy, the infill policy, and the Heights neighborhood plan. As I said, difficult soil conditions make development under multifamily zoning very difficult. These would have to be built slab on grade. You would have to figure out how to do, all kinds of building foundation systems that work with that sandstone. CMU2 requirements will be enforced for this building and site. And state trust land is leased, not sold. Also, landscaping requirements will be enforced as well. So that just goes with all new development. Here's the subject property if you are looking south from West Wicks Lane. Looking again kind of south along West Wicks Lane, but also east. And then south and west to the substation and all the wireless towers. And then north across West Wicks Lane, you can see the front of Skyview High School. And then the neighborhood that's off of Picador Place, that's just to the east on the north side of West Wicks. And of course, the home of the Falcons. Here's your zone change criteria and the zoning map and aerial map, and I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Any questions for Nicole? Councilmember Roussos?
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, the climate-controlled storage type facility, is that will have requirements similar to the one on Central that just went up?
The one on Central is within a planned development zone.
So that was pre-recode, so it'll be,
Right, so that doesn't have the same requirements. We did enforce the landscaping requirements for that. New development of homestead storage there. This would be more like, I don't know if you've ever been to Denver, but there's like a storage box, and sometimes they're multi-levels, but the ground floor looks more like an office space, but you can see individual doors on the inside of the big lobby, the walkway across the front of the building, and there maybe is an office in there as well. Sometimes they don't have an office, they just have, key cards for people to go in. But homestead storage also has climate control, but their buildings have not been built to the CMU2 standards.
I do have a question, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Nase?
Nicole, this developer built a storage facility on Lincoln Lane. Did that have to go, was that done under the city, under CMU2 as well?
That was done prior, the part that's in the city limits was done prior to the code amendments in 2021. It is zoned CMU1. They are doing an expansion, but that expansion is in a county, and that has no street frontage. Basically, the access is off a private driveway. So there won't be any street to address, in other words, on those, and they are more than 100 feet from Lincoln Lane. So
Okay.
those will be a little different.
Okay.
And then I have another question, Mayor, if you don't
Go
mind.
ahead.
And I don't know, I think I asked this question to Andy in an email, and he said he wasn't sure. I think, Chris, you tried to answer this. But it had to do with the taxability of when these lands are leased, because they're not sold, they're owned by nonprofit states. So what is the revenue, if any, as far as property taxes on units that are built on this land?
I'm not certain, but I would hazard a guess that they are considered I improvements. In other words, improvements that are attached to land, but are not the property of the landowner. So, for example, all those coffee kiosks that are on parking lots, those are taxable property, but they're not, and they're attached to real estate, but they're taxed differently. I think the same thing would apply in this case.
I see.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Nicole? We'll give the developer's representative, if you'd like to make a little presentation. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Taylor Kasparic. I'm with Performance Engineering. Nicole did a great job presenting the task at hand here, and really, I'll kind of break up my presentation into two parts. I mean, at its core, we're looking at a zone change from NX3 to CMU2, essentially looking at the districts themselves. And when looking at the districts themselves, this proposal changing from NX3 to CMU2 makes perfect sense for what the zoning code and what the city is looking for. Looking for commercial mixed use adjacent to arterial streets. You look at the land and the zoning that's adjacent to it. You've got neighborhood mixed use, neighborhood office. You've got CMU a little further down. But in essence, all of this is right next to the arterial street, which is where we're trying to put our commercial use within the city. Previous examples from tonight, P&D process, you can only put your commercial use within 600 to 1,320 feet from an arterial. With this proposal, we are right up against the arterial street. So with that, it makes perfect sense from a zone district standpoint for this zone change to occur. Looking at a lot of the comments that we had during the public solicitation and through the zoning commission was concern around trips that a CMU facility would generate. And this is where I'll kind of transition into the proposed use versus the district. When looking at an NX3 facility or an NX3 zone district, you're going to have a lot of different residential units. Those typically generate about 4.5 trips per day per unit. In comparison with a CMU facility, and in particular the use of self-storage, you're generating about 18 trips per day per 100 units. So this would generate less traffic, have less impact on Wicks Lane and the residents that are either on the north side going to and from the high school to Harvest Church or to their residences. In addition to the traffic, and just to touch on highest and best use. I know that's a big concern, or I'm guessing that's a concern of council members potentially. This proposal, as far as self-storage units, has been thoroughly vetted by not only the state land board trust when they're considering the proposals for leasing, but also through independent third-party appraisers. Those are both requirements as part of setting up the lease for this land, because the state, in doing their due diligence and their statutory requirements, want to put this land to the best and highest use as well. So what's factored into that, like Nicole referenced, this site is very challenging from a construction standpoint. Not only the fact that it's been annexed and zoned within the city for the past 15 plus years and hasn't been developed, but just looking at the site topography, it changes about 24 feet in elevation from the west side of the property to the east side of it. If you were to try to put a large scale multifamily unit building on there, it's not going to work just with the amount of grade change that you have in there, or it's not going to work economically. So with the proposed use of self-storage units, you're able to basically take a lot of that grade out as you work your buildings along the site. In addition to that, and Nicole pointed to this, self-storage unit facilities within the city, and in particular on CMU zone lots, are limited to 3 acres in size. The total area that we're looking at here is about 8.4 acres. So if you just back out the two developments each at 3 acres, there's going to be about 2.4 acres of remaining land that could be developed for one of the other uses that are allowed under CMU2. Obviously, when you look at this exhibit, there's not a lot of development that has occurred on the state land trust. And we really think that, getting some development on this land is going to spur other developers to also look into, hey, this is a great opportunity to utilize land for development that's going to further the city's growth in that area. I don't have a ton of other comments, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Any questions for Taylor before we open up for public hearing? Any questions? I don't see anything.
Thank you very much.
This is a public hearing. If anybody would like to comment on item number 6, please come forward. This is a public hearing. Item number 6. Would anybody like to comment on zone change 1046? If so, please come forward. No one is coming forward, so we'll close the public hearing on item number 6. Kick it back to Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1046 and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Gulick makes the second. Either of you like to speak to your motion?
I will just quickly say I'm heartened to hear that you can't think of an example of storage units that are going to look like this, because I think we can all think of examples of storage units in our community that don't look so great. And so kind of getting that picture out of my mind, I think was very helpful. And also understanding about the particular construction requirements of the land was a very helpful piece. So I appreciate all of that information.
Thank you. Councilmember Gulick?
I guess I would say the same and then just offer that, a commercial use is more appropriate for here. And in terms of long-term traffic, actually, even if this, almost any kind of commercial use, I think actually be better for traffic, because then there would be services that are closer to a lot of residences up in the heights. So I think having a CMU2 is appropriate. not a big fan of self-storage either, but I'm happy that we have in our zoning ordinances put in place at least some things that will ameliorate the impact, visual impact. So I support the project.
Thank you. Any other, Councilmember Nice?
Be taken down.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Nice, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is the presentation still up?
Yes, the map showing the general outline on which lane.
Yes, please. And then I do have a comment, if you don't mind, if someone else isn't recognized first.
There, now we can see you.
Okay, thank you. So I won't support the motion. If the motion doesn't pass, which I hope it doesn't, I think when we look at the inner belt loop, this is not a catalyst project that I look at as something we want to see running down the inner belt loop. When we look at the growth policy, and this is something I believe that when Councilman Owen and I have talked about what we would like to see on the inner belt loop and what is good for the inner belt loop development, because it's a long road. We got to get developed, and I would say that number 3, it doesn't promote the general welfare and discourages the high value development along the inner belt loop. I think these are the kind of things that we need to develop, get higher type developments in there. I don't think it meets number 4, which is to generate enough tax revenue. We can see it's on leased land. Yes, we'll have some infrastructure that maybe generates some lease income. But again, having a higher, a different zone like a CMU1 along there, having more businesses along there is going to promote a higher tax, at least some higher tax revenue there. I think number 8, as far as the character of a neighborhood, I think it's negative and it's contrary to the wishes of the neighborhood. There was some negative testimony during the zoning commission, and I think there needs to be higher development. If you look at how it fits within the neighborhood, the closest CMU1 is a couple properties away. The CMU2 is much farther away and across the street on a corner where there's a car wash. Again, I don't mind it being more interior and off of the inner belt loop if they want to do CMU2 there. And if they want to rezone some of the N2 and 3 into CMU2, that's fine, but leaving the CMU1 along the corridor and arterial, because the arterial can handle a lot of traffic. Traffic is not going to be an issue on the inner belt loop. Number 10, it doesn't really support or encourage the appropriate use of the land. I think, number 7, I don't think it meets number 7, and also 10. So there's a lot of here that I don't think it meets, and so I would encourage council members not to support this motion, and we'll see if it fails, then we can have a motion to deny. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Further discussion? You do have a motion in front of you for approval. Any further discussion? Councilmember Aspenleiter?
For the record, I'm recusing.
Yep, we appreciate that. Councilmember Aspenleiter has not participated in the discussion and won't be participating in the vote. Any further discussion? I'll just comment, I'd love to see this very high-value residential, given our housing shortage and opposition from people across the street. But I don't think there's any chance of that happening. The market has spoken by not doing anything with this property. The existence of that bedrock would have to make any development there hugely expensive, tens and tens of millions of dollars versus just millions of dollars, I guess. And although that might be possible in a very high-value neighborhood, that's not the situation here. Especially complicated by the existence of this lease relationship. The reality is a developer is not going to put tens of millions of dollars on property that they do not own. That's just the Montana way. Maybe they should, but that's just not the way we think, I'm afraid. So hopefully this will be better in appearance. We have plenty of storage units, as we all know, 10,000, I think the staff report says. We've all got too much junk, but that's also that, and casinos and coffee kiosks, I guess, are the way of the future. And banks, even though people don't use banks anymore. I don't know why, but anyway, that's the market. Any further discussion on this before we proceed to a vote? Okay, the motion is for approval, item 6. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay?
Voting in opposition, Councilmember Neese. All other council members, with the exception of Councilmember Aspenlighter, voting in favor. Motion passes. That concludes item 6. Brings us to public comment on things not on our agenda tonight. We've had some people in the audience who have been very patient and have learned a lot about land use or caught up on their sleep. I'm not sure which. So go ahead. We just ask that you tell us your name and address and keep your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. My name is Riley McCauley. I'm a representative for the Carpenters Union Local 82 here out of Billings, Montana. My office is at 530 South 27th Street. Tonight in front of you, I have a handout that all of you should have in front of you on tax fraud in the community. Tax fraud's taken a pretty big impact. We haven't seen a lot of it in the state of Montana in the past 10 years, but in the last 3, we've started to see it, pretty substantially hit the market. I've worked in this community since I was in high school, whether that's in residential construction or commercial. The members that you see behind me also work in this community. So tax fraud has taken a huge impact on our communities, whether that's underground economy and cash pay, where we're losing tax revenue, losing out on workers' compensation and unemployment insurance. So the things that those 3 items can cause is you can have people coming back into the community. If somebody gets hurt on a job site and they don't have workers' compensation because they're cash pay, or whether they're a 3rd-tier subcontractor on 1099, that can also affect our systems, because then they're coming back and utilizing the system to help get their medical coverage, help get things taken care of for them. Tax fraud is a nationwide issue. It's causing over $10 billion worth of losses in tax revenue between federal and state entities. It's also causing issues with trafficking. A lot of the workforce that is getting cash paid that's being brought into the city of Billings, which we have found on projects in the Billings area, as I've talked to you before. We had an issue on a city-funded project, and then we had an issue on a TIF-funded project where there was a labor broker overseeing workers and paying cash money. Those have gone to the state level. They are being gone after for those issues. But these are items inside of our communities that are actually being utilized where we are losing out on the revenue and the workers are being taken advantage of. A lot of times in underground economy situation, those workers are being trafficked into the U.S., whether they're coming from Mexico or wherever they come. They're being taken advantage of. They bring them here, they put them in a place to stay, they pay them cash money every day. We don't see any tax revenue out of that. That hurts our communities. Those are jobs inside of our communities that we are having to foot the bill for, that could come back into the community pocket and be able to help fund our projects. So I appreciate you allowing me to come up and talk to you today, Mayor and council members. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Ryan, it was Ryan?
Riley.
Riley.
Yes,
Riley, thank you. Do we have other representatives? Any other comments? I'm not seeing anybody. Everybody else is shy, and Riley did such a good job making the pitch. And we do have a very professional flyer. Riley, if somebody else who's watching wants a copy of the flyer, what would they do?
So you can actually find all that information at stoptaxfraud.net, and I apologize for not letting you guys know that. So if you go to stoptaxfraud.net, all the information is on there. You can also print the flyers out as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you. If there aren't any questions, is there anybody else with us who would like to make a comment on something that was not on our agenda tonight? No one is coming forward. Anything in the way of council initiatives? Then, council, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.